Thank you, Lou. Pleasure. I don't have the humor that Lou has. I've heard some of the jokes that he's put together in the last 2 days. I want to talk about what we talk about at a business school as to how do we remain contextually relevant. And contextual relevance says that currently there's a lot of analogies around cricket. So if I had to use a cricket analogy, my role as chairing the final session on the last day is what we would call in cricket a sweeper role. I have to play the role of trying to integrate of all of what's happened over the last 2 days. And unfortunately, South African sweepers haven't been particularly good in the last 2 weeks. So for the session, I'm going to be British. I'll try and amend my accent. I'll sweep in a different way. But I think we've got a very diverse, very different panel. Peter, I like the smile on your face, given the cricket analogy.
Yes.
But I'm going to use the session to try and bring together all of the elements, but also to look forward and really to think about how do we take a lot of the conversations we've had on emerging technologies and look at the future. What is the potential impact? I've said to all of the panelists that they're familiar with many of you in the room, but there are some new faces in the room, so I've asked them if they could kindly introduce themselves in the beginning and then give us some of their perspectives, after which we'll have an interactive conversation. So I'm going to start with Dr. Kenneth Oye, who has given us some perspective today, but I'm going to ask him to give us some view in terms of how he sees technology and the future.
Okay. First, the brief introduction. My name is Kenneth Oye. I'm a professor at MIT, and I sit in 2 areas, in the social sciences and engineering, and have been working on technology policy and international relations. I mention that because I've been working with all kinds of crazy people. MIT, by definition, is filled with crazy, intelligent people who come up with interesting technologies that they claim will change the world. Now, the dirty little secret is that some of the technologies they develop do change the world. But our problem, as we sit in a meeting like this, is that it's very difficult to predict what the effects of a particular technology will be in situ. When you take technology out of the laboratory and move it into the world of finance, commerce, or government, the consequences, the applications are often very difficult to understand. And I ended my keynote with an emphasis on the significant uncertainty associated with how things will develop. That said, it, I think, is very clear after sitting through a conference of this character. If we go through the examples of technologies that we've heard about, some of them were near term, here, now. Some of them were blue sky, looking over the horizon in the quite distant future. The biological computing work, for example, is not quite here yet. And sticking with the stuff that we know about already makes life more certain, but kind of boring. Right? We know that e-commerce is here. There are a number of things that we heard about whose immediate effects can be seen and smelled. I'd actually like us to focus not on the blue sky, 25 years out stuff, because frankly our capacity for projection there is so limited, but I'd recommend that as a panel, we sit and we try to think through how things that are tangible and either here or almost here may fit within the context of South Africa and Africa more broadly. And also to think through a set of questions that we have not discussed systematically. So we can talk about benefits, applications, but also we should be thinking hard about disturbance, consequences, effects. And let me give 2 little examples before I turn it over to my other panelists. I'm not going to repeat the keynote. But if you look at emerging technologies of the past and their disruptive effects on developing countries, not advanced industrial countries, let me give 2 little examples. You have the production of synthetic dyes. And the consequences of this great discovery in Germany for India were catastrophic.
Sure.
Okay? They were catastrophic because the displacements that followed from the creation of synthetic dyes on the indigo industry were harsh. And the British colonial masters were not particularly interested in or good at buffering from the shocks, at helping to develop strategies of adjustment and adaptation. It was a bad story. But the other story is the development of synthetic rubber. Now, there's this little place called Malaya that some of you may have heard about that remains significant in terms of rubber production. But Malaya was a little bit better than you might expect in terms of engineering and adaptation and adjustment to the change, developing alternative crops. And this is on the negative side of technologies. The conference is focused on the positive applications. But as we think about the acceptance of technologies and their effects on Africa, I would submit that we think about both aspects. Because the role of companies and the role of governments and the role of civil society is to be dealing with the benefits and the risks. We've talked about the environmental risks and security risks before, but also the societal implications.
So, Suman, I want to come over to you because Kenneth speaks to the fact that there are crazy people in environments like MIT, and you've delineated...
And Georgia Tech.
And Georgia Tech, and all of the environments in Silicon Valley and Boston and Amsterdam and tech hubs globally, and you've delineated the developed world versus the developing world, and the consequences of what gets developed in first world developed environments on emerging market economies, most pronounced in environments like where we're sitting at the moment. How do we get a much more closer alignment between these two worlds to be able to manage or mitigate the implications sometimes that you speak about?
I'd like to start with saying that people at Georgia Tech are slightly less crazy compared to MIT.
It's not true.
But then MIT is known as the Georgia Tech of the North. So I don't know, maybe that's a reason. Oh, just kidding. So it's important that, I agree with Ken, that it's important that we don't look too far out because things are, visibility is very poor if you look too far out. So it's better to look, close, things that are happening today and in the very near future in terms of, what kind of things that we see. But one of the, I think, key challenges is going to be the interaction between humans and technology. So as technology is taking its own course, so as I was speaking earlier, that as equipment have to be digitized, okay, that we need to have a digital duplication of physical systems, and decision-making has to take place in the digital domain, and that's where things like AI and machine learning and a lot of things that we are going to be able to use to optimize decisions, make more holistic decisions, better decisions than we can make as humans. How do we translate back to the physical system with which humans still have to interface? And that's where a lot of robotics and other mechanisms needs to come in place, such as wearables and other things. And at this point, I'm not sure, Abdullah, that I'm actually answering your question because I may have missed the question. I thought you were asking someone else, but
I'll blame it on jet lag. I'll blame it on jet lag. Yeah. No, and I know you're going to Cape Town, so you can get over there.
No, but I'm going back to the original question that you asked and you mentioned before we got started, that how do we see things happening, and who knows? So all of you know about Elon Musk, who started Tesla, among many other companies, and he's of South African origin. So someone asked him, with all this automation and things that is happening to automobiles and his things that he's doing to Tesla, someone asked him, what's his future vision of an automobile? And he gave a very short answer. He said, I visualize an automobile that does not have any steering wheel anymore. See, that's a human-machine interaction. No steering wheel, because his philosophy is, when this autopilot technology with the sensors and everything, is perfected or comes close to perfection, that digital decision-making by the car, by the sensors, is going to be much better than humans. And he predicts that accident rates are going to drop by over 90% when all cars become autonomous rather than humans driving cars. Because he thinks that decision-making is much better than human decision-making. But who is to argue? We don't know, how things will pan out. But we know that human mind is being replicated by AI. So where is the human involvement? Today we think that AI cannot replicate the level of human thinking and that we are still superior. But when that happens and when AI gets better and better, and that becomes the medium for decision making, the mechanism for digital decision making, then what is the role for humans? And what kind of brain power and other interface mechanisms that we'll need to be able to interface with technology and with digital system.
Thank you, Suman. Lovely. So, Tony, I want to maybe hand over to you. And I know you do quite a bit of thinking and work around this human-machine interface.
Yes.
And what Suman speaks about in terms of the levels of AI getting to a point where machines have deeper capability. Give us some of your insights in terms of how you see the future of this.
All right. So, afternoon, everyone. I'm the new face at the panel. So, my name's Tony Christodoulou. I wear two hats. One is adjunct faculty for GIBS. I've been lecturing here for 8 years in digital disruption, technology, effective execution. But the other hat I wear is that I'm the CIO of a global Fortune 500 company for EMEA called American Tower. And what I hope to bring is not just, the theory, but also I've got the scars because I'm out there trying to live it every day and implement technology. And I think, when I come to a conference like this, the first thing that comes to mind is, science fiction is becoming science fact. When you look at some of the amazing texts, and then you go back, and then people still can't get their processes right. We're working off Excel spreadsheets. We ask the customer to fill out 30-page applications in the bank. And what I see as one of the challenges is that our ability to actually adopt and execute technology. So we come to these conferences and we get exposed to these amazing things, but how effective are organizations in actually adapting and effectively executing technology to a business objective? That's the question. And when I think about technology, there's all these hype words about digital disruption, but is technology really the focus, or is it about the human sociology that's changing? And when I think about technology and I hear the word digital disruption, I always say to my exco, digital disruption is not about putting a front-end tech over your existing products and services. It's being brave to look at business transformation, to change the way you do your business and products and services and enable that with technology. We talk about, the future around where technology is going and about humans' ability, but I argue that if you look at our children, which will become our future customers, is that a very sociology around technology is becoming intertwined. And those are going to become the future customers to our products and services. Do you honestly think your child in the next 20 years is going to walk into a branch and go through that type of 19th century process where a competitor is going to be offering that they walk into a dealership and the minute they're looking at the Merc, they get a ping and they've been approved? And this is happening with ABC Financials in the East at the moment. So, technology for me, as much as it's a focal point, it's about the leaders of organizations having the foresight to say, am I looking at the customer through my current 19th century lens, or do I really have an appreciation of how we need to change in the next 5-10 years to be relevant in today's businesses? How do you expect to sustain your products and services where entry to market these days, because of the compounding innovation of technology? I just think when I was in high school, if you could HTML code a website, you could probably make R1 million. And today I can go to Wix.com and create it in 5 minutes without any coding experience whatsoever, which means that for businesses to enter markets, the fundamental aspect of technology strategy is not just going to be about your ability to, apply this amazing tech, but it's about making it relevant to your business. And lastly, to that point, how are you taking your people through a journey of change? How are people in the organizations actually understanding technology? I can tell you my biggest challenge as a CIO is not executing technology. I've got smart people in my team. I've got great minds behind the desks there. We're doing robotics process automation. We shouldn't be calling it robotics, I agree. But we are doing RPA. It's replacing accounting services. Repetitive tasks are being automated. So we're doing all these great things in the background, but the biggest challenge for our IT projects is user adoption. So if user adoption is the challenge, then what are we doing to take people through a journey through sound change management principles and linking technology roadmaps to a business objective? Not to sit there and go, I hear this is new technology out, apparently it can smell things, which we all were wow about, and everyone's view was, well, where can I apply this? You could see it was quite interesting. Some were like getting in trouble because if your wife has it on her phone, you got problems. When she smells it, you weren't at the office, you're at the pub. But jokes aside, are we really thinking about how we're going to transform our businesses because of technology? Not try and put technology in front of an existing business model that's becoming vastly irrelevant in today's times.
Lovely. Thank you, Tony. Let's move over to you, Peter. I mean, you in the robotic space, you do quite a bit of work there. How do you see some of this? I mean, Tony speaks about this cognitive rewiring of the end users, of our customers, of young people. How do you see this playing out in the robotic space?
At the moment, there aren't enough robots around that people encounter. They're still novel. You're surprised when you see a robot. How many people saw a robot today? Nobody. Yeah, it's usually the reaction that I get. So look, I think this is a technology that's got. I really don't know how it's going to play out, but I think we need to get more systems out there and just get learning and experience about which applications for robots work well and which ones don't. I mean, we know that they've done a fantastic job in manufacturing. So, tick, they're good in manufacturing. We know that they're good in mining because it's got the right economic drivers in mining, right? If you can automate a machine and you can save 1% of a cycle time, for a mining operation, that's probably worth tens of millions of dollars a year. ROI, tick. But a lot of other industries don't kind of have those economics, those numbers. And I think we're still scratching around to try and find what applications make sense. And it's going to be very country specific. So, if you're in Europe, manufacturing makes sense. If you're in the US, defense, nuclear, maybe chemical cleanup makes sense. In my country, mining and agriculture makes sense. In Japan, looking after old people makes sense. So, it's not a one-size-fits-all for countries.
So let me pause you there, right? In South Africa, the mining sector is hemorrhaging in terms of levels of unemployment. We've seen upwards of 30,000 people losing their jobs in the last 6 to 8 months in this country.
From the mining industry?
Yeah, as a consequence of vagaries of the economics of mining, commodity price cycles, etc. Not as a consequence of robotics, right? You argue that we're going to see significant impact in terms of P&L, return on investment in terms of robotics.
Yeah.
How does a country like ours, which is grappling with high levels of unemployment, deal with that interplay?
That's one of the reasons I felt kind of uneasy coming here. So Lou was very persuasive, but I think I'm peddling a technology that makes no sense at all in a country that's got 30% unemployment. In my country, we've got, I call them labour vacuums. We've got areas the economy needs labour, and people are not willing to go and work.
Wow.
And the only way we could get people to work during the last mining boom was to pay them insane amounts of money. And they'd fly in, do these fly-in, fly-out operations. But it bent the whole economy out of shape because you couldn't get a builder because they were all getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to drive trucks in northwest Australia. And so, we've got just a very different labour market. So if there are jobs that are absolutely dangerous, that human beings shouldn't be doing, then robots should be doing that. But if you've got jobs that people can do, and you've got people who want to do them, that's difficult. You might make more profit if you put robots in there, but then you're going to have huge social disruption. And if you've got large numbers of people who are unemployed, it's dangerous. It's hard to keep a country stable.
Sure. Let me move over to you, Njideka, because you've had an incredible career and you've studied extensively in the Western developed markets, in some of the crazy places that you speak about, Kenneth, where you see the sophistication of technology. But then you've also had a wealth of experience here on the continent, doing a huge amount of work in the social entrepreneurship realm and also in the broader environment. How do you balance this interplay between the Western developed world that has a very different context, canvas that it's painting on, versus the dynamics of what we find here on the ground?
I think what stands out for those of us social entrepreneurs or even social entrepreneurs is really this whole concept of equity, right? The disruptive and emerging technologies are transformative, they're profitable, but the question is, are we leaving people further behind when it comes to equity, when it comes to education and access to entrepreneurship opportunities as well? And so for us, it really takes working across multi-stakeholders, across the government, the private sector, and other civil society organizations to ensure that we're bringing the best of what we have in terms of quality education and access to resources. And it doesn't just need to be access to resources in a classroom, but access to massive open and online content so that young people living in developing countries have these resources to be able to keep up with their digital peers.
Lovely. So I'm going to ask you, Kenneth, a question. Google speaks about moonshot thinking, 10x. What will fundamentally change the world in the next 10 to 15 years? If you had an opportunity to say, what are the two technologies that you think in the next 10 years will fundamentally transform the future? What would you say they are?
Okay, I'm going to answer that with particular emphasis on Africa.
Right, lovely.
And let me give you actually examples, one of which was sparked by your discussion of mining. Okay, so in biotech, one area of application that may be relevant to the problems of Africa, South Africa in particular, is biomining.
Right.
To both mitigate waste problems, but also to more efficiently extract precious metals from what is now waste. Okay? And by increasing the efficiency, it might actually take that industry and put it back onto a more solvent footing. Second example, relevant to South Africa, is what I mentioned in the keynote, the development of saline-tolerant plants. You have a problem with brackish water and saline deposits in soils. I know of a bunch of different groups that are working on that exact problem. And at the same time, both of those examples require engagement with stakeholders, because the consequences of adoption of the technologies are not limited to those that would be adopting.
Yeah.
Okay? And I feel, pardon me for adding a third, which I have to do. It goes beyond South Africa. We talk gene drives and the control of vector-borne diseases, dengue, malaria. And it's a promising technology with potential significant side effects. This is a personal request. I would actually like to have a stakeholder engagement exercise on gene drives with localization measures to try to limit the spread, but to be focusing on the credibility of those measures, identification of uncertainty. But I want it to take place in an environment where people are worried about malaria, and not in suburban Boston, and not in Geneva, Switzerland. And if any of you are interested in collaborating in putting on such an event, where there's genuine engagement, not just a dog and pony show to get a rubber stamp, please see me after the session, and that's a serious request.
Lovely. Suman, let me ask you the same question. I mean, 10x thinking, and a lot of what we've covered over the last 2 days is how technology could have societal impact, and some of the real challenges we face in health, in education, in issues such as malaria, etc. Where do you see that playing out?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, we expect technology, while it causes a lot of disruption, we want it to improve the quality of our lives, right? Ultimately, we want to improve the quality, and quality of life has many different dimensions, to disease reduction, to better nutrition, to better entertainment, to better education, a lot of different ways that we perceive the quality of life. Talking a bit and related to the other talk in terms of me being in the education industry, a lot of disruption happening in terms of education moving online, right? All of you are seeing this, many of you are seeing this. So complete degrees, I mean, used to be, continuing education more online, but now degrees, so MBA degrees, now many universities are offering online. Right, and it's cheaper to do it online, but you miss, so you can put the content up online. But you miss the interaction, the discussion that you have in the classroom. So the question is that better or not? Is that providing better education or inferior education, given the disruption by the technology? So there was an article in Wall Street Journal recently that many universities in the US, several universities in the US, it's very startling news, have decided to stop their physical MBA program. their in-house MBA program and completely switch to online MBA program. Switch to online MBA program. So this is a huge debate. And so in that article, there was a lot of discussion. So people that can post comments, right, as you have in a news item, news article, and then people post all kinds of comments. So I was reading a lot of those comments, or more than 1,000 comments by people, to get a sense of how people feel. And I was absolutely surprised that a majority of the people, the working population, feel that the online program is going to provide better value.
Wow.
And that kind of goes against my thinking, but they feel that the value, and of course then it's a point of how you define the value, and so cheaper is that better value, but is it better? Cheaper is better value, but is it better education? But these are the things we are grappling with. Right, so I agree that, the problem about the disruption is it has a lot of benefits, but we are grappling with how to use them, how to deal with the disruption. I mean, companies are just trying to figure out, so we talk a lot about Industry 4.0. There is not even a single success story about Industry 4.0 implementation, because it's a huge thing to implement Industry 4.0. Companies are looking in bits and pieces on different aspects of Industry 4.0, but no one has mastered Industry 4.0, number one. Number two, this entire fourth revolution, industrial revolution, this is the start of it. We are at the very cusp of this revolution. Other industrial revolution, the first, second, and third industrial revolution, the length of those revolutions were between 80 and 100 years. Each revolution lasted between 80 and 100 years, and we are talking about starting at the very start of the fourth industrial revolution. We haven't figured out anything yet. It's just conceptual. Okay, this is what it means in terms of execution, implementation, so those are a lot of the challenges, but the expectation, of course, as I believe, that ultimately technology, eventually when we are able to leverage it, should improve the quality of life rather than, take it down. Yeah.
Lovely. So I want to link to your point. And what I find happening in the external environment, pronounced in this country because I happen to live here, is we have lots of hype and noise and sensation around the fourth industrial revolution. It's become the buzzword everywhere. Executives go to the World Economic Forum in Davos, come back, and then demand of their teams that we've got to spray and pray to find new ways to be able to address these challenges. We find that pepper, Peter, has become particularly sexy in South Africa. And many companies have procured pepper. And then what happens is pepper stands there, you go and greet pepper, and then you divert back to engaging with a human because it's not
it's just too frustrating.
It's frustrating, it's difficult, right? And then pepper becomes a nice showpiece that happens to greet children on the weekend, and you can't get much more return from that. But it's become sexy in South Africa. And we're starting to find that executives, businesses are starting to find, how do we engage with 4IR, but really very much in a sporadic manner? How do you get a much more focused approach in terms of how you build strategy and make sense of the noise so that it impacts on the way you take choices as an organization? And I'm gonna pose it to all three of you on the panel, Tony, Njideka, and Peter.
I'll quickly address that. I think it really is very important to understand what aspects of the fourth industrial revolution, if any, affect your business. And that's for-profit or non-profit business. Because just because, XYZ is using artificial intelligence for 1, 2, 3 doesn't mean you should also implement that in your product or your business or your design. I think, what I'm thinking of as I hear this is really, it all boils down to one fundamental thing, and that's actually empathy. Putting yourself in the shoes of whatever product or process, whatever product you're trying to design or process you're trying to implement, who the end users are, and trying to figure out, is this technology applicable for that process? And does it, how does it impact business? Does it impact business positively or negatively or what have you? But I do attend the World Economic Forum meetings, and you come out of there feeling all for IR. But even in civil society, we are warned that you really need to think about what problem are you trying to solve first, and then how does the technology, if applicable, solve that problem? And sometimes, that technology might not solve that problem, and you should be comfortable and confident enough to walk away.
Lovely. I'm going to pause there for Njideka and Sue, and I know that both of you have a flight to catch, and I know that Johannesburg traffic can be particularly busy, and that you have to leave at 1:45. So I'm going to pause there, and really on behalf of GIBS, on behalf of the organizers, on behalf of Lou, really thank you for your valued inputs and for spending some time with us. And really it's a pleasure to have you at the school, and always would love to welcome you back. So thank you for spending some time with us. And I'm going to, on behalf of the audience, afford you the opportunity to thank you on behalf of everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
So we've got 20 minutes. I'm going to give Peter and Tony an opportunity to respond to what I raised, and then I'm going to open it up to you, to members of the audience for interaction and engagement, and we'll close the session at just after 4:05, so you have a sense of time.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll give you a different perspective around, because, a lot of the talks have been about the opportunity of technology, But I think there's a question in the back of a lot of our minds that says, what's the impact going to be? So last year in November, the South African National Treasury contacted me and asked me to come and speak at their job forum event that they run once a year. And the topic was about understanding future jobs. And they've got all policy writers, and they've got a whole group of people there that are really trying to do the right thing. And it's nice to see. We complain a lot that things aren't working, but in the background, there's people getting together and thinking of these things. And I spoke about this topic around supply and demand. Simple economics. If we're pumping out a group of people from our education system that are going to be going into roles that are no longer going to be required, that's a problem. And I'll give you a good example. In American Tire now, we're busy working with robotics process automation, where we are going to be automating what I would call mundane, repetitive type operational activities. Now, am I going to need 20 accountants in finance in 5-10 years? No, you're probably going to maybe need 3. And then in the education system, kids are being told by their parents, be a lawyer, be an accountant. This is what you've got to aim for, because this is the mindset of the perfect job. And the concern I have is, never mind our education system, that's a day conversation around, what are we, because for me, that's the one sector that's so archaic if I think about how we teach our kids, and then they come into this digital world. And as much as they're picking up digital from a sociology perspective from a young age, we're teaching them certain subjects that we've all been learning since how long, and then we're expecting them to be relevant in the workplace. And they're going to be learning jobs that may not be relevant. So I think one of the things we need to be thinking about is, I'm a big fan of technology. I believe that it's going to bring great things to society and to businesses. But the dark side to this thing is there could be a disconnect between our focus on technology and the skills we're going to need in the future. And I'm wearing my South African and African hat when I talk about this, is that what are we doing to make sure that we are creating the future pipeline of supply for the demand that's going to be required in the next 5 to 10 years. And it's not doom and gloom. There's great things happening in pockets. I don't know if all of you have heard of We Think Code operating out here in Johannesburg town, where they've taken kids and they're placing them into organizations. They're very smart and applying these things. But to your real point, we can't also put blinkers and think there'll be no impact. Because what technology is going to do is create self-service type capability. Are you going to need someone in Pick and Pay to stand at the till when it comes to taking your groceries? I can tell you now, in the 5-10 years' time, self-service capability technology is already here and it's happening. And that will have an impact on people. So there is this reality of impact. So we've got to be thinking as policymakers, as organizations, that not just talking about all the awesome things tech is going to do, but understanding its adoption, understanding its impact, and then asking the question, what are we doing to make sure that we're going to make ourselves relevant in the future, which is really important.
Peter? Lovely, Tony.
Just like to follow up on Tony's point. Do you use the expressions white-collar, blue-collar workers
we
here?
very much
Okay.
We do.
So I think there is this thing I call the white-collar conceit, and that is that I've been to university, I'm smarter than a tradie, and I think that the tradie is going to lose his job to robotics and automation, and I'm okay because I went to university. And actually, it's the other way around. You mentioned accountants, lawyers, blockchain and contracts is going to do away with them, a lot of medical professionals. So they're not the professions we should be encouraging our children to go into. Education, absolutely, and many other areas of medicine we should be encouraging our children to go into. Some of the jobs that tradespeople do, what an electrician does, what a mechanic does, what a carpenter does, that's really hard to automate.
Yep.
They're going to have much, much longer working careers than the lawyers and the accountants, to be honest. Going back to your I think that was just a rant. Your question was about the fourth industrial revolution. Look, I'm pretty skeptical about this. I think it's too early to call a revolution. I think it's a marketing term. And I think a lot of tech companies are making a lot out of the fourth industrial revolution. It's a way of making people, customers, feel that they're not keeping up. But hey, I can sell you a thing, and now you're in the Industrial Revolution 4 dream. You're living the dream. Just let me sell you a thing. And I think for governments, it's a way of conveniently sort of parceling up all the concerns that they've got about the economy. All their anxiety at a government level is packaged up. They're all focused on this Industrial Revolution 4. They come away from Davos talking about this. And so governments think, if I just fix this, everything's going to be great. And so, I think it's too simplistic. So I'm very skeptical.
So what I take from you, I mean, you raise the point that anything that can't be digitized is going to become so much more valuable, those skills, etc. Mm-hmm. And I always have a running joke with my wife that she's an accountant and she probably will face challenges in terms of relevance in the future. And she always throws it back to me until, Kenneth, you joked to me now after Suman spoke that now that the MBA is going online, perhaps people like me will probably be without jobs. Kenneth, where do you see this playing out? I've got 3 young kids. It's quite a worry.
Couple thoughts. So first, I have to say that I'm struck by the faddishness of much work in the space that we've been discussing. You take the fascination with STEM, and please don't tell my colleagues at MIT that I'm saying this, but the notion that the way to adjust the future is to learn coding. Okay? It's not necessarily wrong, but it could be very wrong.
Right.
It could be very wrong because that actually could be something that's going to be automated out of existence, at least in terms of mass numbers. Or biotech is hot. Now, I know that I gave you a lecture that was focused on biotech. But if you look over the past, you'll see waves of investment concentrating on sectors. And oftentimes it doesn't make sense. You'll see stock prices correlated when the definition of the sector and the commonalities of the firms don't make sense. Another little note. If you look to individual companies and their fate in hot areas, the dirty little secret is that most firms that are created in waves of creative passion, as everyone realizes that something's important, the aircraft industry in Wichita, the automobile industry when it started, the typewriter industry, what happens? The death rate among such firms is extremely high. Yeah. Everyone going in believes that they're going to be the survivor. But that television survivor might be a way to be looking at what happens when you follow the herd into the obvious choices. Yeah. Because you end up killing each other off. The hog cycle applies to investments.
We do this over and over again.
Pardon?
We do this over and over again.
Every time.
It's kind of hardwired failure mechanism.
We're just going to use
humans.
robots this time.
Well, look, my wife's grandfather was in Wichita, Kansas, and there were lots and lots of aircraft companies, and he thought he was smart, diversify. And of course, none of the ones that he picked survived.
Wow.
However, being a chemistry teacher did give him an honest living for a while. But the point on faddishness, hog cycles, enthusiasms that don't necessarily have foundation, and let's call it pretend wisdom without real knowledge, is part of the story here. And governments are also obviously fond of this as well in terms of doing industrial policies, over-investing in some sectors. Whenever anyone says, it is obvious that, it is time to run.